Hey guys, head, shoulders, knees, and Trampletoes here. And today I want to talk about this dumb item. So, just before I get into the nitty gritty, in the show notes, I'm going to have this broken apart by section for like different things that affect this, like different sections of damage, I guess. So if you don't want to hear me yapping and just like give like a preamble and just talk nonsense, feel free to skip around. Anyways, so long story short, I avoided making any builds around Trampletoes for till like very recently because I just kept thinking, well, that's clearly dumb. There's no way these boots are going to continue to exist. And we're like a lot of patches in and like multiple months since this has been a known quantity, and they're still here. So I don't know. I guess they'll be around to the .2 patch, would be my guess. Don't quote me on that. I have no idea if that's true. But yeah, long story short, so after the patch, I saw a YouTuber by the name of PoE Bota. I will link his video in the show notes. One tap a pinnacle boss with Greater Lightning Bolt, Fortress, and Trampletoe. And, you know, I saw Trampletoe stuff, and I was like, well, that's probably not that impressive. I'm sure his gear is nuts. I open up his PoB. His gear is, like, super reasonable. And his, like, max hit on Greater Lightning Bolt, if we're being really generous, is, like, 170k. So I was super confused, and it made me want to investigate the mechanics of these boots, I guess. So that's what this video is. So if we're getting the damage, I kind of want to go over the mechanics of this. So quickly, as a demo, let's say I create a 500 life enemy, which level 9 Frostfall with Icicle has, and I hit it with Mace Strike. My Mace Strike, let's just say, deals 10,500. So that means it takes 500 damage to kill these initial like crystals, and the remaining 10,000 damage is the overkill. Now, Trampletoe says 30% of the overkill is dealt in a 2-meter radius, which is going to be, in our example, it's going to be 3,000 damage. Now, Mace Strike does not have very good AoE, but because when you kill one of these frost walls, it creates out a shockwave effect, which is going to then kill more of the frost walls, which create a shockwave effect, and it's kind of just going to prolif out like that. Like, for example, we could do something silly like create like a big chain. As you can see, I popped the whole thing, and that's because when I hit this, like, let's say I hit like 3 enemies here, that shockwave is just going to kind of prolif out because it's going to keep cascading and killing more. Now, this, like, at a baseline, especially alongside Killjoy, is kind of just broken already, right? Killjoy essentially is going to let this deal, like, it deals 30 damage, but this effect happens twice, so it's essentially, you can think of it as just 60% of your overkill damage is dealt in a 2-meter radius. And like baseline, that's pretty broken, right? That's just like a lot of damage. Like if you put this on the boss, you hit, that's gonna, without any additional effects, that's just gonna deal a lot of damage. Now, it gets way more fucked up. So we'll get into that. So why this gets so dumb so fast is you can actually scale the shockwave effect that is created from these boots when you kill something. We were saying this is like essentially 60% of our damage is dealt as overkill, but this is Fizz, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that already. So let's say we get 50% Fizz here and then 50% Fizz here. So now instead of dealing 60% of our damage in a shockwave when we kill something, we're dealing 120%. So instead of dealing 10,000 damage in a shockwave, we would be dealing 12,000 damage in a shockwave. But you can take way more increases to damage than just 100%, right? Like, especially generic stuff. So for example, like over here, this is increased damage if you dealt a critical hit in the past 8 seconds. This is not tagged to an attack or spell, so this would scale our base hit, whether it's an attack or spell, and then it would also scale a shockwave. But then you can get 20 here, 20 here, 30 here, and then probably just, let's say we get 30 somewhere else just to make it easy on the math. So if we're doing 60% of our damage as overkill as a baseline, if we have 230-ish% increased damage, that's going to be 60 times 3.3 is about 200%. So that means that our shockwave is going to deal double the damage of our initial hit. So when we kill a frostwall with 500 life with 10,500 damage, 10,000 is the overkill. Instead of dealing just 6,000, it is now going to deal 20,000 from our initial hit of 10,000. Now, as I mentioned with the ramping effect, what's really silly about this is that first shockwave is going to deal 20,000 damage, right? But when that shockwave kills a frostwall, the base hit of that is going to overkill by like 19,500, which is going to get increased by 230%. So that's going to deal like like a little over 60,000 damage, and then that's going to overkill something by like 59,500, and that's going to get multiplied by 230% increase. So you got to say where it just gets like really silly. In fact, what's kind of funny about this is if you use a big AoE, like Earthquake or like Hammer of the Gods, it's gonna like actually hit the whole thing. You actually would lose a little bit of damage as opposed to just like hitting like a corner, just because of the ramping effect. You know, depending on like where the boss set up, it's like not exactly the easiest thing in the world to do that. But all I'm getting at is you actually get more damage by not popping the whole thing with your first initial hit because of this ramping effect of the shockwave increasing the damage, which is truly ridiculous, right? But there's more. Now, I noticed another interesting thing when I was looking at PoE Bota's character in PoB, and that his wand had a double damage as extra roll in it, and I was thinking, oh, there's no way that works for Trampletoe, right? But after testing it, it definitely does. So, yeah. Like, let's say you get a wand that has like 30% extra fire, 30% extra cold, and 30% as extra lightning, and then you take like 120% increased elemental damage right here, and we had that 10,000 base hit, so that would be, you know, 9,000 times like 2.2 or whatever, so it's like just under 20,000 elemental damage on top. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times it's going to be easier to scale something like generic, like elemental damage or, I don't know, chaos damage, just depending on where you're at on the tree or what you want to actually play. Because there's actually not that many sources of generic increased fizz that I know of, but there is generic increased damages like littered throughout. Like right here, it's like there's 100% from like the 70 here and then 30 here. But long story short, that's why I get into that, because this also ramps and it might be easier just depending on how your character's set up. The first thing I thought of when I figured out this worked was I was like, man, Chayula Monk really sucks, but his entire ascendancy is just damages extra chaos. Like this, like all these purple flames are 14% as extra chaos. This is like 20% as extra chaos. And then there's the 10% as or 11% as extra chaos here. And then Ming's Heart is 40% as extra chaos, like at max roll. Now, obviously, Ming's Heart's a lot worse if you have a ton of this effect already, and it hurts your Queen of the Force move speed. But anyways, I also discovered somewhat recently that bosses in PoE 2, like Pinnacles, actually have 0 chaos res. So chaos damage in this game is actually just a lot better than it sounds, just like a baseline. Like in Ming's Heart, essentially, is just stronger than it seems. Because bosses in PoE 1 have like 50 chaos res, so if you do Despair to get them down to like 30, like 15% or whatever, you're still not even getting them 0. But in PoE 2, they just start at 0. So Despair gets them like to like negative 35 or whatever. So I don't know, chaos damage, especially with how easy it is to actually get Wither in this game. Like for example, like let's say you had like some kind of wall effect that you're like blowing up, and you had like Wither on it, and it like hit a bunch. I don't know. Maybe there's synergy there. But anyways, sorry, I'm getting to like a whole side grade. But essentially, damage is extra works. And I had a stupid idea. And long story short, that's how you end up doing dumb things like playing EQ like Chalupa Monk. But yeah, like stuff like this goes up to 5% of damage is extra on a minion. With corruption, and get up to 6%. SRS makes a 60% baseline, and then if you do like unearthed shenanigans, you can get a ton of damage extra out of this item. And maybe that's like finally a use case for it. But between this and then wands getting damages extra, those are like all the big ones I know of. There is another unique scepter that's 60% of generic, 60% of damage is extra fire, and Ming's Heart. I think I covered all the big ones that I know of offhand. Because like all the other ones that I can think of are like specific to spells, like Archmage for example, or like Infernal Cry specific to attacks, and like all that kind of stuff. But damage is extra, definitely works, and could be a way to actually scale your damage with Trampletoe. Now this last one's a bit excessive, but if you're at all familiar with how secondary effects work in PoE 1 with things like corpse explosions or generic explosions like Profane Bloom or Impulsa, they're not an attack or spell, so they have a base crit of 0. So to actually get them to crit, you need to get base crit from somewhere, right? It's actually the same reason that these unarmed skills in PoE 1 have a crit chance listed on it, because if they didn't have this, you couldn't crit with them. Like, for example, if you had Hand of Chayula and this +9 crit chance was not here, you had 5,000 crit chance, 5,000 crit multi, it wouldn't do anything, because you need to have a base crit to actually be able to increase your crit and actually multiply your crit by, right? Same reason like the concoction skills have this as well. So this has a 0 base crit chance, like the shockwave effect this creates. And the only way to actually get base crit that I know of in the current state of the game is critical weakness. So like if I winner a boss, they are going to get 10 stacks of critical weakness on them. So now this effectively has 10% increased crit, 10% base crit, like starting. Like this is 9, this would be like 10. It would be 19 with this, right? But so anyways, that means you can take generic crit bonus like this, generic crit chance. Like this stuff is littered, like crit chance, crit bonus, and all that stuff is littered throughout the tree on items, tons of sources of this, right? And that's how you could actually scale the damage on this, because you're scaling your main source of damage with crit, but you could also scale this as well. Now, where this gets a little bit weirder is, so like let's say I put 10 stacks of critical weakness on the boss, and then I frostwall them. So these shockwaves, when they hit the boss, the boss has this 10% base crit given to this, right? But the frost wall effects do not, because you cannot critical weakness frost wall. There's a lot of stuff you can't do on like the walls, like ignites, poisons, like I guess just ailments in general. But there's tons of stuff that like doesn't work on them. So like this like cascading effect that I was talking about, crit does not contribute to the ramp on that. However, how much that matters, I don't know, because the damage on this like kind of setup is already just so silly. But like this like if I shockwave here and this pops other frost walls, these do not have a base crit, so my crit will not affect this. When it hits the boss, it will get increased by the crit, but it doesn't have the ramping effect on the wall, if that makes sense. I know that's like a little confusing, but yeah. So the last thing I want to touch on is like, much like how we were able to scale this shockwave effect with generic damage, you can also scale the AoE with generic AoE. That effect is not very common for what it's worth. Like for example, there's like none in this part of the tree at all, but like I have 20% on a threshold jewel from here because it's 4%, and then I have 5 notables. It's crazy this notable doesn't get hit by its threshold. Anyways, you can get 10% on generic jewels. I think the only one that you can't get 10% on, because you can get it on ruby, you can get it on sapphires, but I don't think you can get it on the dexterity one. But there is generic damage or generic AoE throughout the tree. Like there's 27% here, there's 28% here. And then there's like other weird conditional stuff. Like for example, I have this anointed. This 15% increased area of effects for attacks will not affect this explosion, but this top one will if I've stunned an enemy recently. Similar with like this stuff, like 20% increased area effect if I've killed recently, but 10% for attacks will not affect it. Like that top one will if I've killed recently. Just to keep in mind, killed recently and like stuff like this, like movement speed if you killed recently, that stuff does not consider Frostwall like a kill recently effect, I guess, just to keep that in mind. But yeah, I know there's like another 10% AoE over here. There's like piles and piles of area of effect for attacks. Like there's just like this whole wheel, this whole thing. And then there's some stuff for spells like up here. And then I guess the spell cluster over here. But see, this stuff does not affect it. So it's mostly just jewels, and then try to get the generic nodes if you can, if you're trying to actually scale the AoE of this. If you want to actually test how big of an AoE you get it, like because PoE, the AoEs have like breakpoints or whatever. So like if you want to check in PoE, I would use a ball lightning with only 10% quality, because that would make it 2 meters, because this is also 2 meters, and just try not to get increases to spell AoE. So you can actually scale. Like for example, if you get like 96% increase AoE, this goes up to 2.8. I think at like 50-ish, I think it goes up to like 2.5. But yeah, long story short, not a ton of sources of this. That might change in the future, but if you actually want to scale the AoE this, or there's some other generic secondary effect you want to scale the AoE of, you can do it. You just need to get generic AoE. One thing I will say that is better about getting AoE on this, it's hard to get too much, but like the Herald of Ice effect, where like it chains and killing packs, like if you do get a ton of AoE on this and the areas are dense, you do get that like prolif effect of like just popping everything. It's just way harder because like Herald of Ice's base area, sure, I think is only 2 as well. But the thing is, you can use supports with it. You can use magnified effect, and then all this generic attack AoE scales it. So it is going to be, it's very easy to get Herald of Ice's AoE to like 4 meters. It is almost, I would assume it's actually impossible to get this to 4. Getting it to like 2.8 is doable, but like past that, it's going to be a serious investment to a point of where I'm not sure that it's actually worth it. I want to say I covered everything that I could think of. I'm sure I missed stuff or messed something up. If I did, please let me know. If you can think of anything cool to do with Trampletoe that I didn't cover, also please let me know, because I always like new ideas. Even if it doesn't work out, the fun in PoE for me is the discovery, so please share ideas if you have them. Like I'd really like to figure out a way to use this, but like SRS gives this like 60% damage as extra because you can have 11. This can corrupt to 6% damage as extra per undead minion. But it's like, to really make this worth it, you need way more than that, because there's already a scepter that's 60% as extra fire. So I don't know. You can do like unearth stuff, but it's like, that sounds super annoying. Maybe there's a way to do it that I'm just not thinking of. I'm not a minion guy, so this is like the last thing for me, right? I'm sure someone has a better idea than that. Like really broken stuff you can do with this this whole Trampletoe setup is like Detonate Dead, because Detonate Dead's base damage is already ridiculous. But it's like, do you really want to play Detonate Dead? Detonate Dead's so lame. No offense to like all the DS lilies of the world. It's just, I've played enough Detonate Dead for the rest of my life. I don't think I ever need to play it again. I say that, and I'm sure I'll play it again, but you know, just silently judge me if I do. All right. All right. Poops and butts out. Oh, dang it. One last thing. I am super stoked for the PoE 1 19 new ascendancies, by the way. That sounds more fun than a normal league in PoE 1 because, like, honestly, I don't even care if there's a new league. I just want balance changes more than anything, almost every league. Like, I could give a shit if there's a league mechanic at all. I just want changes to the game. So, like, 19 ascendancies is, like, ridiculous. I was thinking about uploading some videos, some thoughts on the ones that they've already showed so far because I don't know. I think that's some pretty cool ideas for them. So if you guys are interested in that, please let me know, like comment or whatever, and I'll upload them because I'm going to be brewing around them regardless. So might as well share my thoughts if you guys care to hear them. I guess. All right, for real, it's time. Bye.